What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and in today's episode of the fighting game tutorial series, we are going to be going over the store part 6, or in-game currency part 2, however you want to think of this. And what we're going to do this time is actually bind the elements from our store items to another menu to just see if we want to confirm purchasing the selection that we have made. And if we do, we are going to then be able to purchase the character, but nothing is going to happen right now because we don't have any locked characters. We need to go over like locked characters, locked stages before we can go unlocking them. So we'll have the menu brought to this pop-up. We will be able to navigate between the yes and the no. If we hit yes, again, nothing's going to happen because we can't actually buy it right now. Also, we don't have enough tokens or currency to do so, but even if we did, we don't have anything to do with it. So that'll be the next topic that we cover. But if we hit no, we return to the menu. You'll see each item does have the name of the item and the number of tokens or currency that it costs to purchase them. So that's what we're going to be going over. The same works for the stages as well. So all of your store items will be able to pull up this menu and get ready to be purchased for the cost that we assign. So that's what we're going to be covering today, guys. Hope you're excited. I know I am. If you are, and you want to check out the rest of the series before we start this episode, I'll link this playlist in the top right corner right here. You can check out everything we've done to get to this point. All the menus, all the combat, everything. Alternatively, if you're just interested in the store widget and the currency, I'll link you to this episode right here, which is the first part of the in-game store. With all that said, we can go ahead and get started. So this is a Blueprint and C++ tutorial. And we are going to go to the code first because we're going to update one of the structures we have in our base game instance.h. So when we started the store mini-series within this fighting game tutorial, we had created this E unlockable item type, which determined what type of item we were going to be unlocking or buying from the store. And then we created this F unlockable item that was a structure that held that data along with the name, description, and image of the object or item that we were purchasing. I've gone ahead and added an additional variable to the F unlockable item that I've called currency cost. If you have the name of your currency, this could be token cost or money or cost or whatever it is you want to call it. But really, this is just how much of the in-game currency we are going to need to purchase this item. If you are unlocking it without purchasing it, you could leave the cost as 0, and that will still be fine. We'll know that it is unlocked through other means, so it is safe to put this in F unlockable item, even if you don't intend for it to be purchased or for all the items of this structure to be purchasable. So make sure you update F unlockable item to have that integer for currency cost. Additional note, I do use the same U property as I use for all the other variables in the structure, but just so you're aware, making it edit anywhere, blueprint read write means we can see it and edit it in the blueprint. We will also be able to edit it on our data table that we're using to keep track of all of these items of the structure. Now once you've added that, we can go into the editor. And let's go to the data table, speaking of that. So I have unlockable item data, and this is the data table for all the items that we can unlock, and really all the items that show up in the store currently. So I have a new column now called currency cost, and I can assign it individually on each item. So every single item in this data table can have its own cost. You can see I've set them all to be different values. So we have 20 for the mannequin, 40 for the mutant, 5 for the first stage, 15 for the second stage, 30 for the third stage, and 50 for the last stage. Then for all these like locked or hidden ones, I kept the cost at 0. Doesn't really mean that we can just buy them because they're free, but probably we have to unlock them through other means, or they are not available in the store yet. Regardless, set up some cost at least. That way we can test it today when creating that little store item pop-up widget. After you have set up the cost, we have to actually relay that data. So we have it on the data table and the store widget spawns items from the data table, but we need to pass it to the individual icons as we're creating them. That way they have the cost. And then eventually we'll also pass it to this pop-up later in this episode so that it can be displayed as part of that text, that confirmation message that we have. So the first thing we should do is go to the store widget that we have set up in the previous episodes, and this is what mine looks like. There's no visual changes today, nothing in the design view that I'm going to change. But I'm going to go to my graph, and there's going to be some new stuff you see in the event graph, but you don't have to worry about that right now. The main thing that we're going to take a look at is in the event construct. So if we follow the event construct all the way to this section right here, and in this section, we call a function called setItemDetails. And essentially what we were doing is looping through all the elements in the data table, grabbing each item of a certain type. In event construct, we're just using our first type. And then we are creating a store item icon widget, which is this right here. And it stores the image of the item that we're going to buy. It also does a few things, such as store the name and description of the item. That way we can actually display that on the widget for the user when they're hovering over top of it. And so we pass along the data from the data table to the widget. So you have the name, the description, and the image passed along here. We also are going to want this cost now. So where we have this break unlockable item, you may have to hit the little down arrow to see it, but you should be able to see this currency cost variable now. So once you can do that, we want to pass that along to this widget as well. But to do that, of course, we have to update the store item icon widget itself. So let's go back into this widget and let's go into the graph. I don't have anything in the event graph still. The only thing we have in the graph side is the setItemDetails function, and it is going to remain mainly the same. We're going to add an item cost parameter to the setItemDetails function, and then we're going to add an actual cost variable to the widget itself. So first things first, let's add the variable. So plus variable, it is an integer that I've called cost. Default value of 0. And all we're going to do is in the setItemDetails function, we're going to scroll down to the input parameters and add another input parameter. And we're going to add an integer called item cost. And then we're going to pass the item cost from the function into the cost variable that we just created. So essentially, take the item cost that is passed in from the store widget and store it on this item so that we know how much it costs, so the player can determine if they want to purchase it or not. Quite simply, set cost and drag the item cost into it just like that. Alright, and now that we did that, if we go back to the store widget, our currency cost on our unlockable item should be able to go directly into this item cost that should be on the setItemDetails function. Now, if you don't see this parameter, you can right-click on your node and refresh it. And if you do this, then the parameter should show up, then you just pass it in. So at this point, event construct is good. Change category actually does this as well, but it does it for each individual category. So you'll want to do the same thing here. Every time we check for the type. So the first time we check for character, we want to take the currency cost from the unlockable item and pass it into the setItemDetails function call. Remember that you might have to hit this little arrow to see all the variables in the structure. Sometimes that happens when you are updating a structure after you've already had a node, like a break in here. So just be aware of that. And if that still doesn't work, you might have to click on the node itself and then look over at the details and make sure that currency cost is checked as a pin. Once you do that, just pass your currency cost along and you'll see that we do it for the character, we do it for the stage, we do it for the outfit, and we do it for the game settings. So for all my store categories, I pass along my cost to my setItemDetails function, just like we do for all of our other parameters. All right, and that is everything done for passing along the data. We still have to do some stuff in confirm selection, as well as make this event in the event graph, but we're going to talk about that when we get to the pop-up. So let's go there next. Let's create a new widget. Now, what I actually did is I duplicated my widget that I had for the quit game or the exit game pop-up. Because I had this pop up here and it says, are you sure you want to quit the game? Yes or no. And I already had the navigation in here as well. If you've done this, if you implemented this using my methods earlier in the series, you can feel free to duplicate this widget as well. It will make your life a lot easier and you won't have to copy as much logic. But I am still going to go over it in full. It's not too much since there's only 2 buttons you can navigate to and only left and right directions. So it's pretty quick and we'll be able to knock it out in no time at all. If you're not duplicating, just add new user interface widget blueprint, make a new widget, and I called this one store item pop-up. And just so we're clear, the store item pop-up is what happens when we press confirm on an individual item. Not a category, but an individual item. We get this little confirmation pop-up. So once you've created your widget, go ahead and go into it. And I'll show you my design view first. So by default, if you're in Unreal Engine 4, you'll have a canvas panel. And I've left that alone. I still have this in here. If you're in Unreal Engine 5, you won't have one, but you can add one to make it fit with what you're seeing in this tutorial. You can literally just drag a canvas panel into the first element here, and you'll get that. After you have your canvas panel in here, you can right-click on it and go to Wrap With, and it will put the item, the widget here that you choose, over top of it. It will make that item a parent of this canvas panel. So you want to put a size box right here. Then you'll get the size box above it. Now you can go to the size box and I'll show you what I have here. Then I right clicked on my size box and wrap with a scale box. Here are my options for the scale box. They're also not fully set up for an individual pop-up. These are just for scaling later. I already had it on the exit game pop-up, so that's why I'm showing you them now. It's not required that you have these, but we will do more with them later, just as a general enhancements to the game and UI update. And here's what I've got for my canvas panel. Now those are the containers. The important things here are the little pop-up itself, which I just have as an image background, so you can make this whatever you want. But I've added an image to the canvas panel that I called pop-up background, and I have set it to a particular size here. That is just the size that I like. Now I don't actually have any positions or any anchors on this because it's actually being centered by the scale box and the size box. The horizontal alignment and vertical alignment is keeping it in the center, and the scale box is scaling by the safe zone. So the entire alignment is based off of the safe zone. So this is halfway between the left and right and halfway between the top and bottom of the widget. So position wise, you don't have to do anything. And then in here, I haven't put an actual image, but I did put a color and opacity just to make it gray. For the pop-up, you can make it whatever color you want. That is entirely up to you, so you can make it look better than this. But this is just a nice little background so that I can put text on it and buttons on it. It is a variable, but it actually doesn't need to be here. This was left over from the exit game pop-up, so feel free to remove that if you'd like. Then we have 2 buttons, a yes button and a no button. So these are literal buttons that I brought onto the canvas panel. The yes button looks like this. It has the actual position for where I want it to be on this pop-up, as well as the size. And I put it to a Z order of 1 so it appears above the background, or in front of the background. For the style, I've actually selected a button image right here. So you can go ahead and put your own button image in. And then nothing else here is required unless you want to override the on-pressed events for each button so that the user can click on them with the mouse. The button has a child of text. You can drag the text widget onto a button and it will add it. I can't have more than 1 child on a button for text elements, so I can't add it now because I already have one. But I've called this yes BTN text or yes button text. Here are all my settings for this. The text is simply yes to confirm that they want to buy it. Here are my font and outline settings. Now I have the no button, which is essentially exactly the same. I Again, not required that you see all this. This is just my stuff, but I like to show it in case you want to copy the appearance of this at all. Here's my no button text, which is a child of the no button. Text is just no. We don't want to buy it. And lastly, we had the confirmation text, which is actually just this text box that I've made this big and it wraps automatically. The confirmation text is just the height of the background here. And so we can put text at any point in this section. So you can see in my settings here. And I've manually written out the text. Are you sure you want to buy the mutant as an example? But we are going to bind it and make sure that it says the proper text as we play the game. So here are my settings for it. I have it justified, put it in the center. And I made sure that it auto wraps. That way once it reaches the edge, it will go down to the next line. Now this is what it looked like on the exit game, but since this text is dynamic, I'm going to recommend that you don't allow the text to go below the yes and no buttons. That might look a little weird, so you can cap it wherever you want, but probably not below the yes or no buttons. I'm going to put it like there. I like round numbers, so let's do 275 for the size Y. Now when I come into the game, you'll notice it's still here, you can't tell, but if I kept adding more and more text, it wouldn't wrap below that section. All right, so this is the store item pop-up design view. Now let's go into the graph. And the event construct is quite simple. We have listen for input actions like we do for our other widgets. And they're going to be listening to menu left P1, menu right P1, and menu confirm P1. So I have in my project settings, under input, I have input actions for menu controls. So I have menu left P1, menu right P1, and menu confirm P1. So if I press any of these buttons, we're listening for them and we can capture them. Left is A, or left on the thumbstick. Right is D, or right on the thumbstick. Confirm is 1, or the gamepad face button bottom, which is like A on an Xbox controller. Make sure you copy these names exactly or type them out exactly, because if you don't, they won't be listened for properly. So do listen for input action. And we're going to type in the name. So for the first one, it's menu left P1. We want the type to be pressed. So when the user presses that button, this gets called. And when it gets called, we can use this callback to actually trigger an event. So we can drag off of it and type add custom event and then type out the name of an event. And I have called these events P1 menu left, P1 menu right, and P1 menu confirm. So just make sure that you have 3 listen for input actions, because it is important that we have them. We need to be able to do all 3 of those things, move left, right, and confirm a selection. All right, and then as far as this event construct goes, what we need to do now is actually make the ability to move left and right. So if we go to our move selection function, if you have duplicated this from the exit game pop-up, or if you are creating a new widget, add a new function that we call move selection. And once you make this function, you can add an input parameter by pressing this button here, and we want to make it an integer that I call direction. Simply put, for this widget, direction of -1 is left and a direction of +1 is right. After adding that, let's go into the function. I'll show you what it looks like. Again, there's no vertical movement, so the move selection here is quite simple. Basically, we need to see where we're currently at, how many options we have, and make sure we're not below the minimum or above the maximum. So let's make a variable in here. Let's actually make a few variables in here. Let's make a current P1 selection, and let's make a max selections variable to start. So plus variable, make them both integers. Current P1 selection is just our current selection. Really, it's just yes or no for this widget, so it's very simple. It's going to have a default value of 0 if you want it to be on the left button, or 1 if you want it to be on the right button. Since my no button is on the right, I do want the current P1 selection to start on 1 because I want them to start on no, not yes. We don't want to trick them into buying something. but that is entirely up to you. So mine is a default value of 1 in this case. Now the max selections variable here is also an integer, and the default value for this one is actually how many elements you have. So we have 1 selection, 2 selections. Max selections is 2. That's what we want to default this variable to. Alright, so once we have this, like I said, we need to take in the direction, and we need to make sure we're not going below the minimum or above the maximum. Basically, is this a valid movement on this pop-up? So to do this, we take our current P1 selection, we get it, and we add the direction to it, the direction that's passed into move selection. Then we have to make sure it's greater than the minimum, so integer greater than integer, and the minimum is going to be -1. Remember, we have index 0 here and index 1 here. So the minimum is 0, the maximum is 1. So if it's greater than -1, it's at least 0. And, Boolean, the current P1 selection plus the direction is less than the number of max selections. And that's what we have right here. So we bring this into a branch, and only if it's true do we actually set the current P1 selection to be the result of current P1 selection plus the direction. Now, once we do this, we have the new button that we're actually hovering on, and you can see when we're on this widget, that is true. So if we're on store and we go in here, you see the gray button that we're not on is the yes button, but the no button is blue because we're currently hovering over it. As I press left, the yes button becomes blue and the no button becomes gray. So the blue button is the button we're currently navigating on, and we want to make sure that the user is aware of that. So we need to not only update the actual button internally, but we also want to show it to the user. And so at this point, I want to make a new function called moveSelectionBorder, and we're going to use this function to actually highlight the proper button. So make a new function, moveSelectionBorder. In here, I have 2 input parameters. One that is a Boolean to play sound effects or not, and then the other one that is an integer that's called selection. So we know what button we are currently selecting, or which one we are hovering over. Once you've made this function, go ahead and call it right here. You can set play sound effects to be true by default and set current P1 selection to get passed into the selection parameter on moveSelectionBorder. Alright, so go into that function. And the first thing we're going to do is play a sound effect if play sound effects is true, because at this point the user has moved from one selection to the other, so we do want to play a sound effect. So we drag off play sound effects, type branch, and then bring this into a play sound 2D if it's true. Then pick the sound effect that you want. My movement sounds on my UI are the tick sound. But regardless if it's true or false, they're going to meet up and perform a switch statement on the selection integer that we passed into this function. So we want to do switch on int. We want to press add pin 2 times because we want to have 2 elements. Index 0, which is the yes button, index 1, which is the no button, and by default, you'll have this default section, which is just if the integer passed in doesn't fit on either of these values. Make sure you pass the selection from the function into the selection on the switch statement. Now, in here, we have 2 different things that we do. It's really the same thing, but we do it on the yes button and the no button. So the first thing we do is if we are on index 0 with this selection, we know it's the yes button. So we're going to grab our yes button and get it. Then we're going to drag off of it and call setStyle. And we're going to use this one that says appearance. You want to get this dark blue node. There is another setStyle, and you can actually use this one as well, but I like to just edit the appearance one right here. And I right click, I split the struct pin. I then go to the widget style normal and split this struct pin. Here we can modify the actual individual elements of the button. And so what we want to change is set the item that we're hovering over to be the selected button. I have 2 buttons. I have my button, button variation 1, which is a gray button. You can see it. I know it's really small on your screen, but you should be able to see it. Then I have one called BTN P1 Hover Var 1, or Button Player 1 Hover Variation 1. And so this just means I'm hovering over this button. We want to select that one in this case. If we are moving the border and we are on this button, it should be the hovered one or the selected one. So that color, that image is the one we want to choose. The rest I leave default, but you can change things here if you need to. By all means, go for it. Now, if it is index 1, what I actually do is the same process, but using the no button. So literally the same process, just use the no button variable that we have here. And if you want, you can put the default in as well. Put it on the yes or the no. That is up to you. I didn't use it on the exit game pop-up, and we shouldn't ever need it, but you can feel free to use it as a safeguard. It won't hurt anything. The next thing we have to do is clear the old selections, because if we don't call clear past selection here, when we are on this widget, we will be able to navigate, but you'll see they both stay blue. We never clear the old one. After we change the image to the hovered one, we never change it back to the default for the one we're no longer on. So we need to make this clear past selection function right now and call it after each of these style sets. So make a new function that I call clear past selection. Doesn't need any input or output parameters, and just make sure you actually call it each of these sections. Now, once you call it, we can go into the function, and it's very simple in here. So all we're doing is taking our current P1 selection and making sure it's not equal to a specific index. We have two indices that we care about, 0 and 1. So if it's not equal to index 0, that means the player is not currently hovering over index 0, thus they are not currently hovering on the yes button. At this point, we want to reset the style of the yes button. And to do that, I have created two events in the event graph. So if I go to my event graph, I have clear selection 1 and clear selection 2, which you can create by right-clicking and typing add custom event, then giving them a name. Again, clear selection 1 and clear selection 2. These do exactly the same thing that I was doing in move selection border, but we are using a different image. Instead of using that hovered image, we're using the standard gray button image, button variation 1. So if it's clear selection 1, use the yes button and then reset the style normal image to be the gray or unused or unhovered button, whatever you're calling that. If it's clear selection 2, use the no button, but do the same thing with the image where you set it to the gray or unused or unhovered button. Once you have these two events in here, go back to clear past selections, and if it's true that current P1 selection is not equal to index 0, we know we can clear the yes button, set it back to the default, so we want to call clear selection 1. Whether it's true or it's false, we go to the next section then, and we check to see if the current P1 selection is not equal to index 1. We know index 1 is the no button. And so if it's true that the current player is not on index 1, they're not on the no button, so we can call clear selection 2 and reset that back to the gray button. Let's return to the event graph for a second. Now let's make sure in our event construct that we're actually calling the move selection functions. We have created this, but we never went back and directly called it. So in P1 menu left, we want to call move selection. And we want to pass in the direction manually. Since we know we're moving left, we want to put -1 as the direction. Then we're going to call 1 on P1 menu right, but for the direction we want +1. We're moving to the right, which is positive. For P1 menu confirm, we haven't created the function for that yet, so let's go ahead and do that now. Let's make the confirm selection function, if you don't already have it. Make a new function, call it confirm selection. You can take in an input parameter called selection, that is an integer. Go into this function after you've made it, and in here I'm going to set up the logic for it. It's going to do everything we need except for actually purchase the item, which is going to be here. And it sounds silly that we're going to leave that out, but we don't have anything locked, remember, so we can't actually test this behavior. That's what we'll be testing in the next episode of the store widget. For now, we are just going to set up index 1, which is the no button. So we're going to remove the pop-up, and we're going to start listening to the inputs from the store widget again. So in confirm selection, we have this selection parameter, and we're going to drag off of it and bring it into an int. Switch on int. I'm going to add 2 pins again because I have 2 indices, 0 and 1. Now, if it's either index 1 or default, what I've done is I've called remove from parent. When we create this pop-up widget right here, we're going to add it to the viewport. But once we decide to close this widget, if we're saying no, we don't want to purchase this item, we want to close it, so we want to remove it. That's what remove from parent does. And now in here, I have something called creator widget reference. And this is really useful because when we have a pop-up, the inputs on the store widget actually stay the same. So notice how I have the mannequin selected here, and it says, are you sure you want to purchase character mannequin for 20 tokens? As I'm pressing the right input, which is the same whether you're on the store widget or this pop-up, you'll notice the store does not navigate from the mannequin to the mutant. Now if I close this pop-up and press the button, it does. So we stop listening to those inputs while the pop-up is open, but then when the pop-up is closed, we begin listening to them again. So what we need to do is create a variable that is called creator widget reference, and it will keep track of the previous widget that we were on. Call stop listening for input actions on it. That way the store widget does not keep navigating while the pop-up is open. But then when the pop-up is closed, we want to start listening to those actions again so they regain control of the old menu they were on. So to do this, I am making a new variable. If you duplicated this widget like I did, you will already have a creator widget reference, but it's actually going to be the wrong type because before it was the main menu widget. But we actually want it to be the store widget this time. So make a variable type of store widget object reference, and I've called it creator widget reference. We'll go over setting this in a few minutes when we open up the pop-up. But for now, all we need to do is tell the creator widget reference to start listening to the actions again on that widget specifically. So if you grab the creator widget reference and get it, you'll be able to call start listening to actions. But we actually don't have this function yet. So we need to create this, and this is what I said we would look at earlier in the store widget. So go back to the store widget, go to the event graph, and take a look at this event I have here. Now, in event construct, we set up all of our listen for input actions, but as I just said, we want to stop listening to them when the pop-up is open. So what I actually want to do is make another event that listens to all the input actions and does nothing else. I don't want to do all the other logic that's associated with event construct. I only want to re-enable listening for my input actions. I even use the same event. So what I've done is I've copied all my listen for input actions that I had on this widget, pasted them, I then added a new custom event that I've called start listening to actions. So once you make this event and you paste all your listen for input actions here, just go ahead and link them up. So I have menu left P1, menu right P1, menu up P1, menu down P1, menu confirm P1, and return P1, which is essentially like the back button or back out. On all of these, I link them up to the events that already exist on this widget that were set up in event construct. So the callback for menu left P1 goes to P1 menu left, just like it does in event construct. So just link them up the same. So what this will do is if we stop listening for these input actions when the pop-up is open, we can then begin listening to them again. And that's exactly what we want to do. So going back to the store item pop-up, you should now be able to call this function start listening to actions. Again, index 0 we will cover in the next episode, so don't worry about that. Now, at this point, we only have one other function that we need to set up in our store item pop-up. So if we go to get confirmation text, What this is a binding of the confirmation text on the design view. So we can go to our designer and remember this text that I had set up earlier. What we want to do in here is bind the actual text field. So I had written out all this text, and that's all well and good as an example. But we want to actually go and press bind and create binding. When you do that, it will bring you to the graph automatically to a function that's called like get confirmation text underscore 0. I've renamed it to just get confirmation text because I find that to be a lot cleaner. But what we're going to do is now make our own text that we want to bind based on the item that we've selected and the item's cost. Now, two things you'll need to do this are the item cost and the item name. We didn't set these up anywhere in the widget, but that's actually okay because we're only going to be using this pop-up on the store, and the store has that data already, so we can make variables for it and just directly pass these values in. So make two variables, one being item cost, which is an integer. It's going to have a default value of 0, but I actually set two different parameters that you might not see very often. I've set instance editable and expose on spawn. We need both of these because expose on spawn will allow us to actually plug an input in to this variable when creating a widget of this type. Instance editable allows us to actually edit it on a specific instance of the blueprint. So we do need both of these for this to work how we want. And so if we have this set up for item cost, and item name is a string that is instance editable and expose on spawn, again with no default value, when we create the store item pop-up, we'll just pass the data along to this widget. In the actual get confirmation text function, all I'm doing is doing a string append to get the final result of what I want this text to say. So you can make it say whatever you want. Here's how mine is going to go. I'm going to say, are you sure you want to purchase? I'm going to put quotes around the name of the item. For, then I'm going to get the item cost and say tokens afterward. Are you sure you want to purchase the mannequin for 20 tokens, as an example? And the way we can do this is grab our item name, grab our item cost, and we're going to do something called string append. String append. And you can add pins and you can construct a string with as many pieces as you need. I needed 5. Then I type in my data. Are you sure you want to purchase? Item name becomes the thing at index B here. Then I say for, passing in item cost, which will convert the integer to string, which is this little node that you see here. And then I say tokens. Take note there are no spaces between these things in string append, so you'll notice I manually have spaces where I want them. So you sure you want to purchase quote, and then item name, quote, for space, item cost, space, tokens, question mark. So you sure you want to purchase whatever for however many tokens. Then we want to return this. Now, technically this is a string because the item name is a string, but an actual text widget has a text type, so you do have to convert there. But if you just bring the return value from the append into the return node, it will automatically give you this type. You can also manually find this node by typing in toText string. Now at this point, this pop-up will be able to display the proper data, but we need to create the pop-up and actually pass that data along to it. So let's go back to the store widget and let's go to our confirm selection function. Now this is what the confirm selection function looked like already, everything that's highlighted here. None of this is changing. What we're going to be adding is this ugly text that's off to the side. So as usual, I'm going to go over this content first, and then we will actually add it in and clean it up. So in confirm selection, we play the sound effect for confirming. That should happen regardless, so we're going to continue to do that. After playing the sound effect, before calling determine category button to focus, we want to see if we're actually on an item, an individual item in the store and not a category. If we are, we should go ahead and pull up the pop-up instead of changing categories. All right, so that's the distinction here. If we are working with an item and not a category, we should actually treat it as such. Now let's move some of this stuff over, clean it up a little bit. So now what we want to do is actually check our current selection in row. This is a variable that we have on our store widget that determines if we're on either the categories at index 0 or if we're on the individual rows in this vertical and horizontal box setup. If our current selection in row is less than or equal to 0, we are on a category. We are not on an item. So we want to do all the logic that we were already doing in the confirm selection function. None of it is changing. So if this branch returns true, just do the logic we were already doing. The new logic comes in when the branch returns false. So instead of calling determine category button to focus, we want to call determine item button to focus. This is already something we're doing. We've already created it in the series. It's not required for you to actually edit anything. But this will determine what item we are on and get the data about it and return it. So once we have the item that the player has pressed confirm on, we can drag off of it. It returns a store item icon object reference, which is this right here. This has the name, the description, the cost, and even the image of the item that the player confirmed or decided that they want to buy. So we want to drag off the store item reference and we want to grab the cost and the name. Now, you can grab whatever you want. These are the ones I've decided to grab. So feel free to add more to it or not use as much. That is up to you. We're going to need both of these when creating our pop-up, as I mentioned earlier. So now it is time to create the pop-up. So let's do create widget. And we're going to select our new pop-up that we made. For me is store item pop-up. Now, when I do this, you'll see that I have not only the default things of the class and the owning player, but I also have the item cost and the item name. That comes from these variables being exposed on spawn and instance editable. So I can just drag the cost in and drag the name in. It's that simple. Now these variables are set as soon as this widget is created. From here, since we created the pop-up, we want to set the creator widget reference variable on the pop-up to be the store widget. So we have our creator widget reference that we were using in confirm selection, but we never had set this anywhere. If we go to the store widget, we can now actually set this value. For the record, you could actually expose on spawn and instance editable and set it here as well, but I actually have the creator widget reference as a private variable, so I couldn't do that. Long story short, this is how I'm doing it, but you can change it and do it a bunch of different ways. So if we drag off of the return value from the newly created widget, we can find our creator widget reference and set it. We want to set it to ourselves because we are in the store widget right now. That is the creator widget. So we want to use self as what we're setting it to. So I've got some reroute nodes here, but that's all that's going on. Then after we set this value, I want to add the pop-up to the viewport so the player can actually view this widget. So drag off the return value again and add to viewport. After doing this, I want to call stop listening for all input actions. This is actually a function that already exists within widgets. It's not one we created. It will just stop the target widget from listening to any input actions that it was set to listen for. So all those ones we set in event construct, they're no longer going to be listened for. That is why we needed the start listening to actions event. At this point, I would just bring this set of logic in and clean it up better than I did here. Something like this should do. And now you will be able to actually bring up that pop-up with the widget. One final thing I wanted to mention, if we go back to our store item pop-up right here, and we go into the event construct in the event graph, we should make sure that we actually call the move selection border function here because we want to make sure that the initial button the player starts on is highlighted. In this case, play sound effects can be false or unchecked, and the selection can either be a hard-coded one like I have here, or you could use your current P1 selection. Either way would work. Anyway guys, that's all I got for today, so I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope it helped you make your store widget a little bit better, and prepare for what you're going to be using your currency that is in the game for. If it did, please subscribe, and consider checking me out on Patreon or the YouTube membership program. I really appreciate it, so thank you so much, and thank you to all those who have already done so. If you ran into any issues or have any questions about this tutorial or this tutorial series as a whole, feel free to join the Discord community in the description, and I would be happy to assist you. Like I said guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I am Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye guys.